Welcome to the historic Wheeler Opera House. Please take a moment to silence your cell phones. Photography and video recording are not allowed. Please refrain from using flash. Take a moment to locate the exits nearest you. In case of emergency, please look to your left and right. And now give a warm Wheeler welcome to Adam Salah, Luam Malake, and Eli Bucksbaum.
Hello, everyone. How's everyone doing this morning? Lovely. We're very happy to be here today with you all today. Before we get started, I want you to all think of a number between 1 and 10, 1 being not so proficient in talking about design, and 10 being I'm excellent at talking about design. By the end of this talk, we'll promise that you have gone up at least one number. My name is Eli Bucksbaum. I'm one of the co-founders of the Aspen Design Conference. I'm so excited to be here with you all today, joined by Luam Malake and Adam Saleh. Please welcome them to Aspen and the Aspen Design Conference.
Thank you.
So we're joined by Luam and Adam, two incredibly aligned, articulate, and deeply curious interdisciplinary and antidisciplinary designers with backgrounds in linguistics, architecture, cognitive science, art history, and psychology. Luam Malake is an interdisciplinary designer encouraging discovery, social interaction, and agency through her hyper-functional furniture, pieces that are designed to improve social and psychological well-being. A graduate of UC Berkeley, where she studied architecture and art history, she's also an architecture and design material researcher for the past decade, most recently as a senior researcher at Parsons Healthy Materials Lab in New York. At the center of her practice is the idea that design can be a tool for communication. Her work literally creates the conditions under which people are most likely to communicate effectively. Her loom-woven sculptures read as sentences, utilizing materials and compositions as a means of communicating. Her interest lies in how our environment subtly shapes the ways we connect, and how greater awareness in these conditions can return a sense of freedom and agency to the user. She's held residencies at the Museum of Art and Design in New York, where she conducted psychological experiments, confirming her theory that materials trigger subconscious associations, servicing deeply personal responses. She believes in expanding the potential of objects to positively impact human psychology and counteract with the effects of the digital era. She's recently been exploring collaborative partnerships that could make the kind of agency accessible on a larger scale. Like Luam, Adam Saleh graduated from UC Berkeley, studying linguistics and cognitive science. He's an entrepreneur, designer, and the founder and CEO of Press Studio, a design and 3D printing company giving creatives and their communities the tools and the agency to make their creative goals come to life. In 2023, he became part of the Steve Jobs Archive Fellowship, where he invested in a community space in Los Angeles to further the conversation around design and build tools that spread innovative thinking equitably across creative communities. For the last 3 years, Adam has been communicating some of these ideas through the production of modular footwear, enabling him to reach a vastly wider audience than with traditional design objects, further cementing his identity and working and interacting within the white space between disciplines to explore design as a means of communication. These are two designers who reach incredibly similar conclusions about design's power to give people agency and build community, yet they're approaching it from incredibly different angles. So I'm incredibly excited to get this conversation started today about if design can be a universal language. So Luam, Adam, you're both working within disciplines outside of your design practice. How does the study of communication and language inform the work you're engaged in today? And Luam, we can start with you.
Okay. So there's two sides of my practice, as Eli said. One side is that I make these hand-woven sculptures, and the other side is furniture. With the furniture, the relationship between communication and the object is very obvious. A lot of my work is really connected to psychology and anthropological research, especially on a field of study called proxemics, which is about the relationship between human behavior and distance and physicality. So my furniture actually creates the conditions under which people are most likely to converse. So discourse, like the things that are important to discourse have a lot to do with physicality. So if we make eye contact or if we don't make eye contact can have a big effect on how we communicate with each other, for example. And the thing about a chair is it sort of fixes you in one position. And that's something that I want to change about a chair. I want to be able to like make eye contact comfortably with someone over here, over there, over there. And so that's what I design furniture for. It's like, can we like actually sustain communication with someone that's in different parts of the room, someone that's moving around while sitting in the same object? So I also create conditions that are like about a solitary person having different types of experiences through the act of sitting. So for example, like there are some of my chairs that allow you to sit in the fetal position, for example, a position that really gives you a lot of comfort. That's emotional comfort rather than physical comfort, or actually both. So communication in the literal sense is facilitated through these chairs, and a lot of that has to do with like what, me counteracting like what I think technology is doing to us, which is estranging us from the physicality of socializing. Which is actually like really important because that's what our brains and our bodies are wired for, because communication is not a language thing only. It's about physicality too. Like we read each other's facial expressions, we read how people are breathing, if like they're looking at us or not looking at us, then we change how we speak based on how we're receiving these sort of physical cues from other people. So that's really the basis of that, and a lot of that has to do again with like psychological studies and like studies on anthropology. With the sculptures, it's like a different form of communication. It's me trying to communicate abstract thoughts or abstract concepts using materials as the sort of metaphorical content for how the viewer is going to like receive a message. And really that's what I think art is for, is to communicate something that you can't communicate through language. Otherwise, it would be writing, So like what can you communicate visually that you can't necessarily say with words is kind of the point of that work. And my theory is that the physical environment, our built environment, has a lot to do with how we like conceptualize like our world, basically. So as Eli said, I've been a materials researcher for 10 years. I work in architecture and interior design, and like there's like 1 million decisions that you make when you're designing a building that like it's kind of like, does anyone even notice like if the baseboards are 2 inches or 3 inches? Not really, but like somewhere all of this information lives in us because like we've been in so many buildings. It's like our shelter. It's where we like experience the world mostly. We spend 90% of our lives indoors. So like our indoor environment has a huge impact on how we live, how we think. So basically I take materials from the built environment and I think about their metaphorical content. So maybe on the next question I can talk more about that, but that's sort of like how I think about communication. It's like, what can we say visually and physically that we can't say with language, and like how do we create a situation where we can communicate with language and with physicality with the furniture?
I think I share a lot of conceptual space with Luam. I think that's why we're here. My personal pursuit as a designer is in reducing the friction between concept and percept. And to kind of put that simply, it's, how do you get the world inside of your head and explicate it so that other people can interact with that world? And the prevailing model for that happens to be language, right? Like you speak English or whatever, kind of your mother tongue is, and that's how you're able to communicate the vision that you're seeing, your worldview, and have other people align with that worldview. And that's something that's innately human, our ability to extend ourselves. And this system has evolved for many, many tens of thousands, hundreds of thousands of years, this ability for humans to speak and extend themselves out into the world. And my practice kind of studies the analog in design. So how can we explicate visual ideas just as fluently, the same way we communicate conceptual ideas? So how that looks in practice is at Presk, we build design tools. And so These design tools use natural language processing to help designers, creatives, artists alike to communicate an idea naturally the way that they would communicate an idea to their friend or their family, and have that idea manifest as some kind of physical product or some kind of physical artifact. And the way I kind of reached this conclusion was quite by accident. When I was at Berkeley, I kind of entered the university looking to study design and engineering, and in typical Adam fashion, I applied to all my classes late, and I had to take kind of the less popular humanities course, which at the time was Linguistics 5. I had never heard of linguistics before, but in those first classes, my teacher, who, it's so hard to forget this guy, he was like a spitting image of like Robin Williams. In the first class, he kind of drew this transdisciplinary line between, these, what we call geons, which is, the kind of spatial primitives that make up the world, spatial verbs. You can think of it like a sphere, a cone, a cube. There's only about 36 of these primitive forms that make up everything that you can see, and 42 of what you call phonemes. And these are just kind of like the basic sounds and utterances that construct all of the languages that exist across the world, like ah, oo, e, that kind of thing. And he was basically saying, hey, the schematic that we use to construct language is kind of similar to the schematic we use to construct the world around us. And I was like, we could probably use that to build a design tool. And so about 4 years later, here I am working on this problem of how do we use language and this kind of tool that everyone is already innately armed with to help us convey perceptual ideas quickly, convey design languages. And so that's kind of where my practice roots itself.
I think the most interesting part of both of your practices is that you're bringing people together through design. Luam, you're doing it through the actual interaction through the furniture of people making eye contact, looking at each other, experiencing each other's company. And Adam, you're doing it through bringing people into a space and saying, hey, what ideas do you have? How can we make that possible? What's the importance of making community around design or engaging people on a personal, on a deep level through the work that you both do?
What I'm trying to do is create a culture of discourse, and I think that culture is badly needed in this time. I mean, for obvious reasons. We're obviously super polarized politically, but also it just feels like we're learning bad habits from what the algorithms are teaching us in terms of how to communicate, like to say the most polarizing thing or the most incendiary comment rather than the things that bring us together. And the things that people say online are things that they wouldn't say in person to people who disagree with them. And I think like part of like how we acknowledge each other's humanity is through the physical interaction of talking to people, because there's just like so much. We have a richer experience of each other when we're like actually like addressing each other, like by looking at each other, by experiencing the physicality of our humanity together. So I think that's one thing. And then just like creating intimacy between people is really part of the furniture work for me. And there's a lot about like how close people are physically in terms of like how they connect with each other and what they're willing or not willing to say. And there's ways of creating intimacy purely through physical positioning, like for example, like Freud came up with the idea of like in therapy you lay down, like you have the patient lay down, because when they're laying down, it tells them that they must be safe in the environment that they are in, because let's say a wild animal came in the room, you wouldn't want to be laying down in that situation. You can't defend yourself in that situation. So like we have these sort of like ancient part of our brain that teaches us like when you should feel safe and when you shouldn't feel safe through physicality. So these are this is why my work is so interdisciplinary in terms of like learning from research about psychology and anthropology. So how you build community has a lot with just like connecting back to the essential aspects of what makes us human, and not with like the sort of like cultural sort of like element that's become very toxic in our current culture right now. So that's very important to me. And I feel like, even though my work is really about like domestic environments and people who know each other interacting with each other, because these aren't really furniture objects that are like in public space. How you interact with people in your domestic environment will eventually translate into how you behave on the streets. Like if you feel like you have a community of people who are really hearing you, who like you feel like you have people that you can really talk to, you walk around with less anger and with less less of that sort of baggage that makes you the kind of person that's out in the community being negative, being a negative presence there. So that's actually why I do this work, is because the ultimate goal is like, okay, if you can like be a productive person in a social environment that's comfortable for you, then you can sort of branch out after that.
Yeah, dovetailing off that, I feel like through my own experiences working with youth in design, there's a huge barrier of entry into building physical products that extend into the world, be it through art or commercially. And I think I had an early formative experience actually in New Orleans, where I was interacting with this brilliant group of kids in the Ninth Ward. And, I was over there teaching kind of like intro robotics courses and that kind of stuff. And I was there kind of on behalf of the like workforce development department in New Orleans. And, what I found is that a lot of these students were really alienated from their community because a lot of them really didn't want to take this career path. And part of that had to do with kind of a lack of access to creative design tools. A lot of them didn't feel like they wanted to enter this engineering path in their career. And so through having these conversations, I began to understand, hey, there's space to build community and to build kind of an alternative design language about how they can become creative agents in their community. And some of those conversations went, hey, I want to learn how to design a guitar or a motorcycle or a toy based on the kind of unique needs of my community. And it's hard to do that when you don't have the resources to build a business or the resources to enter kind of career technical courses that would teach you how to do that. And again, that's kind of what spurred on this approach to building design tools. And kind of broadly, I took that insight, when I was building this design space in LA, because I found that, this is not a unique problem. A lot of artists feel like, they don't have the agency to impact their community with these physical products. And, I found that a lot of those learnings come through just community events and programming. Eli and I, we actually threw an event not too long ago at the studios, and it was an artist assembly event where, we brought a bunch of designers and artists together, and the provocation was, hey, how does your practice, be it singing or sculpture art or fine art, extend into other product verticals? Be it furniture, be it home lighting, be it footwear. And, I think through that approach, I learned that, accessibility and community was going to be, paramount to the way that I think about community. It's a lot about bringing these tools into spaces that they typically don't exist. And I guess I wasn't planning on talking about AI in this conversation, but
let's get into it. Let's go.
Yeah, in the context of Presc, we've kind of lived in this paradigm where, especially considering language, a lot of these design tools are kind of they're complex, and they're complex because the means to manufacture these tools have never been democratized, but now we have 3D printing and AI, and I found that a lot of these creators, if given the opportunity, would love to create for their community and have agency and feel like they have ownership and feel like they can be the purveyors of their own material culture. And that's really, where I find and situate myself in my pursuit of communities. How do I allow people to feel like they can shape the world around them?
Do you think that, and Luam, you touched on this earlier about how the world, we're disconnected from the world around us, and it's honestly harder now more than ever to communicate with other people and connect with people on a personal level. How does kind of and Adam, to you as well, like how does technology and our approach to working with AI or communicating with things that help us solve problems or build ideas, how does that change the way that we're able to communicate to each other in real life and talk about ideas and articulate things and say things with clarity rather than pumping out a couple of inarticulate messages in ChatGPT and hoping that it understands what we're saying? Does that make sense?
Yeah.
How has communication changed since technology's become such a pivotal part of how we interact online and in real life?
Well, I mean, I was having a conversation with someone last night about, kind of my optimistic hope for AI is the creation of like personal applications. There was a talk yesterday about how a lot of these financial apps that we use, be it Stripe, Cash App, Venmo, are kind of becoming like modes of surveillance. And I think a lot of that has to do with, our need as a community, or the fact that we're kind of coupled to these larger, commercial tech companies that have this like economic imperative for everything they create. And when you use these tools, you become kind of complicit in that economic imperative. And I think, what's interesting about what AI is doing right now is, in the near future, I mean, you can do it today if you're kind of a little bit technical, but in the near future, you can build and design apps that are essentially just for you. And I found that the biggest breakthrough in communication for me has been, how do I use these models of artificial intelligence to explore who I am? I think it's kind of like, it's not a replacement for a therapist, but you can kind of explore the own edges, your own edges of your identity, and then understand perhaps, what a better communication style is, or, you can understand, perhaps, what you need to study or brush up on in order to be, a more productive member of your community. And I'm optimistic about our ability to kind of, I guess just build applications that serve kind of an internal pursuit that doesn't have, an economic imperative. What do you think, Luam?
Well, I'm extremely pessimistic about AI's influence on communication between humans. Thank you.
Valid.
Because AI is the algorithms that we live with on social media. That is also AI. And the way that algorithms have influenced human communication, as I mentioned earlier, is like extremely negative. It's teaching us how to behave in a way that ignites like our most intense emotional experiences. Like anger is like something that moves you to the top. Like a phrase that polarizes people and makes them angry goes to the top of the algorithm, And like I think that like we underestimate how incredibly complex human communication is when we reduce it to just language. It's not language. It's so many other things, and we don't even understand how human communication works. Like, we have evolved over thousands of years to have this really complex system of how we read and understand our world, and we don't even understand it. So, like, how can we optimize it? That doesn't really make sense to me. I mean, we can smell each other's pheromones, for example, and we don't even know that we're doing it. And we're registering changes in other people's emotional states that way. We understand communication based on like the most minute physical changes in the other person as we're talking to them or experiencing them. We can hear someone say something in language that's very simple and easy to understand, but the way that they deliver that statement can change completely how we think about what they're going through, what physical state they might be in at the time. Like, there's so much more to language than just that. So there's other problems with AI too, in that it's learning from what exists already, and it's only learning through language. And I just see like, okay, I'm gonna bring it back to like the foundation of my work is really like Marshall McLuhan's Understanding Media, which is an amazing book that is extremely relevant to this time.
What was the name of the book?
Understanding Media. It was written like in the 60s, I think. And basically what he says is that technology is an outsourcing of the human capability. So for example, when we invent the wheel, when we invent technology, it is like an extension of our bodies. And when we extend our bodies outward into the external world, it degrades our bodies. So when we create a wheel and we can move fast in a vehicle or in a wagon or whatever, if we rely on the wheel too much, our legs become useless. So if like our communication is outsourced to technology, then we become bad at communicating. And we're seeing that happen in real life, obviously, I think. And, the last Surgeon General, who I loved, declared that we are experiencing a loneliness epidemic in the United States. There's so many studies talking about like despair as an American problem. And when you compare Americans' well-being to the well-being of other people in other developed nations, we are way behind. And why, if we have all of these great tools, are we feeling that way? And like we're less healthy, we're having all of these physical problems. He declared loneliness an epidemic because loneliness is a physical thing too. It's not just about, it's complex, but really what makes people feel lonely is that they're not being seen and they're not being heard. And seen and heard are physical elements, So, so I just feel like we live in this attention economy, and attention is the solution to loneliness. If we are giving our attention to these other things that are not in our physical world, that are non-sentient technological objects, then we're not giving each other attention. That's what attention is it's like we can either give it to something over there or we can give it to something over here. And if we're choosing the thing over there and it's technology, then we're not giving it to each other. And it's not a coincidence. Thank you. And it's not a coincidence that we're seeing like these huge spikes in deaths of despair at the same time that technology is overtaking our experience of the world. So that's what the physical world is. It's our well-being. And like if technology can enhance our well-being in the physical world, then I'm all for it. I'm totally for it. But this sort of segregating of our experience in this digital realm versus the physical realm is hurting us. And that's what I'm against. And if AI is going to be that, then like I'm not optimistic about it. But I am optimistic about it in terms of like being a tool for engineering, manufacturing. Like these are things that rely on technology always. So if that's what it is, then that's fine.
Yeah, I mean, I guess my point is not that AI is like an antidote to communicating with each other. And I think the point that I'm making about kind of personalized AI applications actually has more to do with the fact that we're using these kind of like monolithic tools, like engaging with ChatGPT every time we have a question or want to do a grammar check on an email. I think that you're right about AI kind of having this flattening effect about our ability to communicate with each other. And I guess what I'm looking to unravel here is, can we use these tools to just kind of better track our own thoughts as we're organizing them for communication? Maybe this doesn't look like, engaging on social media all the time. Maybe this doesn't look like, trying to attach ourselves to the kind of Google AI recommendation at the top of each query, so that we forget how to, conduct research and forget how to kind of dig deeper in our own thinking, and more about, how do we just use these tools to continue to organize our thoughts, and how do we use these tools to continue to meet people that might have shared interests. But I know you also have thoughts about even that's not quite necessary, right? Using social media or engaging with tools to help you network with folks in your community. Sometimes, in the AI context is just a stopgap. I mean, you talk about how in New York, you find yourself interacting with art galleries probably more than some of your peers or some of the folks that are in the same category as you, and I feel like that's common, and I'm willing to accept that sometimes I do kind of offload responsibility to these models, and I think especially now as they're progressing so quickly, I find myself wanting to go back and essentially read more books, disconnect from this networked reality that has sucked me in so deeply. Yeah.
Well, I think it's good to compare like how we did things in the past to how we're doing things now and what's working and what's not. And I think a lot of people believe too much of the marketing around what these tech companies are putting out there. And activism existed before social media. And is activism better now with social media? I would say no. I think there were people who could organize and make real change in the world before. So I guess what my question is what problem did social media actually solve? And I don't think it really set out to solve a problem. I think it made something that seemed more convenient, but actually is less effective. And I mean, I'm famously not on social media at all. And people are like, how can you be an artist and not be on social media? How do you know anyone? And I'm like, I just know people from being out in the world or from email or other forms of communication that existed before, which were also fine. And for me, it's I don't need everyone to know about my work. I don't need everyone to be in touch. I need certain people I want to have good relationships with specific people who are like-minded and are interesting and people that I want to communicate with. And when you have a one-on-one relationship with people, it's much more effective than having them follow you on Instagram. I mean,
absolutely.
Yeah.
So what are some of the other, obviously we have these problems with, using technology and perhaps using it too much or having that separate us from reality in our built environment. Are there ways that we can design better opportunities for people to work with these tools? I mean, you're creating design tools to help people build ideas, but is that enough for us to be able to kind of come together over design through technology? Or how do those physical spaces manifest themselves in your design practice other than just bringing people together? What's the importance of those moments of engagement that actually help people communicate with one another in a more, communicate with people in a better way?
Well, I mean, at least in the 3D modeling category, I find that 80% of the design process is often kind of lost in operational translation. And so what does this mean in the context of industrial design or creating physical products? It means that for the most part, these tools are pretty arcane. They're pretty difficult to use. There's a pretty steep learning curve. You essentially have to learn a different language in order to use these computer-aided design tools. And what we kind of see AI as is kind of an equalizing force and abstracting away all of this operational friction when using these tools so that we can unburden the designer from needing to think so much about how to translate and a little bit more about curation and about storytelling and about the actual distribution and context of the audience who's actually going to interact with the work.
What stories are you telling currently through your practices? What are you telling? I mean, Adam's developing modular footwear with Presk, and he's used that as a way to honestly just get people really stoked on new technologies and new ways to do things.
Yeah.
And
You know, it's funny. The story doesn't really exist explicitly in the product. Like we're not literally like, you know, like writing down stories, you know, against these products. We're not really, you know, the products themselves can't stand alone as the storytelling device. It's really about empowering the creator to have a storytelling device. And so, you know, one of the reasons why footwear is so impactful, at least in our category, is you have a lot of these athletes, you have a lot of artists, and these artists have communities and you know, youth communities and youth audiences that follow them and look up to them and want to track against their life and base their achievements or you know, hold their achievements as an aspirational goal. And you know, oftentimes these artists are forced to, or athletes are forced to kind of sign their life away to these you know, large mega brands. Think like Nike, Adidas, Puma of the world. And what we see, you know, these design tools and these manufacturing tools as in this context is, hey, can we allow these people to tell their stories through this product? Let's say by doing a community activation where they're going to go to a school and give away these shoes and tell their own story. And the shoe just kind of holds space as an artifact for the stories that these creators are going to tell themselves. And you know, we also see it as a lever for economic empowerment. You know, especially, you know, now we're kind of entering this this name, image, and likeness era in college athletics and high school athletics, where a lot of these students for a long time could not use their name, image, and likeness to tell their story and be kind of more than an athlete. And a lot of times, you know, a lot of those activations start at the product level. This is why you have kind of brand endorsements through these larger companies. And again, you know, a big reason why that hasn't happened in the past is because the barriers of entry for manufacturing and design have been so high. And so you need these huge teams of, you know, sometimes hundreds of designers, product managers, and manufacturers to build and distribute a product. But now, because of the way technology has accelerated in our industry, you can give those tools in a massively truncated way to these, you know, to these kind of cultural activators and have them actually engage with physical products in a way that they couldn't before. How
does that agency just impact design holistically? Just giving them that opportunity to know that they have the tools to do those things.
Yeah, you know, we see a movement happening that we're kind of defining as kind of like participatory design or mass personalization. You know, we no longer kind of live in this keeping up with the Joneses world, at least, you know, with these younger generations that are interested in kind of personalizing products. What that means is, you know, we no longer have monolithic brands. Everyone kind of has created their own brand. And what that means is, you know, again, one of these cultural activators can create a product with us, and then they can actually invite their audience to tell their own story through that product, whether that's through creating a diffusion line or creating a, you know, a cultural artifact that they're able to talk about online and say, you know, how that product impacted them and how it's fitting into their life. You know, I think the future that we want to see is more people beginning to define themselves as designers within our physical environment, instead of just trying to subscribe to again kind of like these flattened aesthetics with pure economic imperative from these larger companies that are defined by mass you know, mass production and not mass customization. We think that, you know, a degree of individuality is important as long as you're, you know, as long as that subsists in like a cultural niche. Your community should be able to have pride for itself and be able to define kind of its own rules and its own social dynamics. And oftentimes that starts with physical space and like the products that we share. You know, again, yesterday, you know, there was a talk that was done, and it was talking about how community does not have to just exist through, you know, through physical shared space. It can also exist through, kind of shared motifs or shared aesthetics. This is like that, that kind of group of photos where a bunch of people are wearing rose print shirts and they're carrying roses around the city. And just through this motif, they're able to kind of share some sort of idea space. And, we just think that that's important. And we think that that should permeate through the way that we think about design as we go forward.
Yeah, and that's one thing I really like about your practice is that you're using technology to counteract concentrated capitalism. And I think like we both share this, this sentiment of just like culture is being determined by these huge corporations and not by individuals. And so, yeah, empowering individuals is really important. So I'm glad that you're thinking of that. One of my favorite essays is this essay by Donald Judd called "A Good Lamp is Hard to Find." And he's like, why can't you just go to Main Street in your town and buy a good lamp or a good chair, that really reflects like the architecture of your community and like makes sense in your environment and your local culture. And it's like because concentrated capital like reduces everything to sort of, what the masses should want or what the masses should have. And that's something that I'm struggling with as I'm branching out into mass production. It's like, how do you bring innovation there? And I think it's really hard. And I'm working in these two modes of like, I make everything myself as an artist. And I also want other people in the world to have something that they can, that pushes American innovation forward. And this is actually the subject of my next solo show opening at the end of January. And I really appreciate that about your work. And like America needs more manufacturing. I think that's just a fact. And if we can like bring it in a way that isn't just like, we all get the blandest thing in the middle that like the most people will buy, then I think that's going to be really good for culture.
Because we're so like attuned to, commercialization, and obviously people will start businesses or ideas centered around community, but then it quickly becomes about commercializing and making money. Are we in danger of, in the future having, design language becoming inaccessible because of the way that we commercialize it, the way that it exists in the world, and the way that we need to kind of move forward and make money? Some people need to make money in their lives. It's kind of inevitable that because things have to become products, that some people just won't have access to some of these tools or some of these ideas.
Well, with my work, like people say, oh, well, you're trying to change America through art objects that only rich people can buy. How does that work? And I'm like, well, the ideas are free. Like if you put out an idea that other people can take with them, then I think that's the role of art. It's not really about if you can buy my furniture or not. It's more about teaching people how to be sensitive to the environments that they live in and think like, yeah, maybe all my furniture in the living room shouldn't be facing the TV because it makes it too hard to talk to each other if that's the situation. And anyone can make these kinds of changes or think more consciously about like, actually most of this work actually came from like these fights that me and my mom would have about like how she always wanted us to be in the dining room. She's like, we only talk in the dining room. And I'm like, yeah, because look at your living room. It's like no one can face each other in that space. And like if like the TV is like right in front of us, it's like the only like the room is telling us what to do, and the chair tells you how to sit. The chair determines your position in the space. So it's like, how do we bring that dining room experience into the living room was kind of like how I started. So yeah, I think ideas are something that can be put out there, even if people can't access, even if people don't have the money to buy the things that we put out there. I think what Adam's doing is sort of democratizing design too. I'm trying to be in mass production and see if like good ideas can break through the marketing side of that and all of that kind of stuff. But yeah, it's challenging, but I think like it's a worthy endeavor, and there are people at all different types of fields that should be, I think, invested in this kind of thing. And I think like the fact that we're working in such interdisciplinary ways is really important. And I think like that's actually like what we need more of in just in culture in general. And Yeah, there's a lot of like issues with that. I think like the university systems need to be less siloed in how like people major in things. For example, like I work in academia and I see that all the time. Is that like there isn't really much crossover. I think like innovation should inherently be based in interdisciplinary practices too. I think like if tech companies had included sociologists and anthropologists in the development of social media, a lot of obvious mistakes could have been avoided. So I think you can still work in ways that are commercial, but if you do it more thoughtfully, then you can like avoid some of the pitfalls that a lot of people experience in creating innovation.
Yeah, we think a lot about, as manufacturing changes, where do these kind of legacy roles go? And I think they don't go anywhere. They're reorganized. The abstraction changes. You move from a world where you need technicians to a world where more of these technicians take on creative roles that command creative capital. The big bet that we are making is that the United States is going through this kind of reindustrialization, reshoring, onshoring movement. And the behavior that we kind of hope to encourage, along with kind of just being more sensitive to the space that you inhabit and how does that change your behavior, is again, how do you become an agent of your own environment? How do you become a purveyor of the material culture in your home, in your community? And like, what does that look like? Has anyone here like watched Star Trek? I know it's kind of, all right, yeah, some of you. Cool. I'm a big Trekkie. You can tell I'm kind of a nerd over here. Yep, thank you for the one person who clapped, fantastic. Yeah, so in Star Trek, there's this vision of, or there's actually there's this pre-context of a kind of global kind of resource crisis that was solved through the creation of the replicator. Does anyone know what the replicator is? Okay, so the replicator is this kind of sci-fi device that has atomic materials, basic materials, and can kind of transmute them into a physical product. You go up to the machine, and there's this kind of like iconic imagery of like Spock or Captain Kirk going up to the machine and asking for whether it's like a wrench or a cup of coffee, and it just kind of materializes in front of them. And the way this kind of solved the resource crisis is now all of a sudden, instead of thinking about manufacturing in this monolithic, centralized way, you can kind of fragment manufacturing into the home, into domestic environments, into workplaces. And you can do that because now, instead of needing these huge amounts of raw material, the material becomes kind of atomic, and you can kind of silo it in these replicator machines. For a long time, this was fiction. But over the last 10 years, manufacturing technology has progressed tremendously. And the kind of vision of the replicator and the vision of the implications the replicator has on kind of access to resources is becoming real. And so the bet that we're making is, hey, if we can put these 3D printers in people's homes, if we can create a culture where that kind of infrastructure is appreciated, if people begin to understand that they can actually create a huge amount of the objects that they interact with every single day in their home, in their car, on their person, then you actually create a culture where, hey, instead of like going and just kind of like doom scrolling on Amazon, you can actually have a dialogue with this appliance in your home, and anywhere from 3 to 24 hours later, you have that object in front of you, and now you've empowered yourself to, again, kind of become the creator of your own environment, the creator of your own space, and you rely less and less on, again, these monolithic, flattening mass production infrastructures. How does this change creativity in the future? How does this change the way that we interact with each other, the way that we interact with our home? Well, I think it just, I hope it makes us more thoughtful creators. I hope it makes us more sensitive to our environment. I hope it makes it easier to interact with sustainable materials on a daily basis. I hope it makes us, extend ourselves more across the world. I hope it improves our ability to kind of have an appreciation for the world that already exists around us, an appreciation for what it takes to design things, for what it takes to manufacture things. But we have yet to see. This is still a kind of like a bleeding edge technology. But this is the bet that we're making, is that domestic manufacturing is within reach, and we hope that the result is it makes kind of a more creative union.
So how do you teach, like, we're talking about kind of these ideas of people using these tools and maybe having more autonomy over their choices, and potentially even being able to fix any problem that may exist in their own home via the technology that they have in there. So I was kind of thinking about, like, if you can fix every problem via this technology in the future, what does that look like when you're not engaging with the plumber or the electrician, and all of a sudden you have so much empowerment that you actually don't need to interact with anybody other than this machine? I don't know if, Luam, you had any kind of thoughts on, like, being reliant on such technology and how that might impact us as individuals, like living individuals, trying to be humans.
Wait, what do you mean? Like,
I guess more just on the line of, I know you're skeptical of how we become reliant on technology and mass-produced, like, conglomerate companies, how that changes when we have our own tools, but also kind of segregating us from real interaction with real people.
I don't see the plumber being erased by technology.
I know, I guess I don't interact with my plumber very often either, but just the sheer fact of maybe not having as much interaction with humans.
Well, I don't know. I'm very specific about communication. I think, like, manufacturing and tech, like, we're already estranged from manufacturing. Like, we don't really have that much to do with it. And I think that's what Adam is doing, is trying to counteract that alienation from the means of production.
Yeah.
So yeah, I don't have a problem with, like, design technology being part of manufacturing. Like I said earlier, like, I've been a materials researcher for 10 years, and most of what I research is about new technologies for design. And I think, like, problem solving is the root of what we need technology to do. And I think a lot of technology is not solving problems. Like I said earlier about social media, did it set out to solve a problem, and what was that problem? I feel like we had the technology we needed to connect with people, and it's caused all of these problems without any obligation to solve those problems. And that's just, like, compounding problems. That's what we're living through right now. So if we create technology that actually solves problems, like maybe the plumber does get erased and, like, we never have plumbing issues, I'm fine with that. I mean, I don't think that's an important interaction that we need to salvage. I think friendship is an important relationship that, like, shouldn't be mitigated by technology, or doesn't have to be mitigated by technology, because that friendships don't have problems that need technology to offer solutions. So I think that distinction is very important. And I think, like, post-war America was all about mass production and technology and technological advances, but it was also heavily rooted in problem solving. Like, there was this perception of, like, we won the war because of technology, And so, like, what else can we create that will, like, solve our problems and make our lives better? But now we're in this sort of, like, hangover of that sort of conceptualization where we think all technology equals progress. And that is not true. Because I think a lot of things have gotten worse because of technology. And why? Because problem solving, that thread has been lost. So that's what I'm in favor of. Is, like, if we can solve problems with technology, let's do it. That's what it's for. But if technology creates problems for us and disrupts the things that we like, like, a lot of the talk about AI is, like, really dehumanizing, because it's all about, like, let's take creativity away from humans. And it's like, but creativity is what makes us human. Why would we want to eliminate that from our experience? That doesn't make any sense. Socializing is, like, the essential element of what makes us human also. It has so much to do with health, like physical health. It has so much to do with counteracting aging. It has so much to do with like how we survive. Why would we outsource survival?
I think I have like a just like a appendage to that. If we kind of throw it back to the Star Trek example, excuse me. The role of the plumber, the role of the electrician, the role of the engineer, the role of the therapist, the role of the head of communications, they don't go anywhere. I think in this paradigm of this future of domestic production, the way I think about it, at least, is that problem solving starts at like problem identification, and the provocation that I'm making is not that you're gonna have a machine in this home and all of a sudden you know how to like fix your plumbing. But what I do think it does is it unburdens the problem solvers, and so that's kind of my hope with domestic production is, and this is maybe this is a not super effective example here, but one of these service workers, a plumber, an information worker can come to your home, and hopefully there's a spirit of education there. And I think like that's where I find, where friendship fits into this situation really neatly, is it's about understanding that everyone can begin to understand the context of the world around them a little bit more deeply. You asked the question at the beginning about, like how do you get people to begin to adopt this kind of thinking? I kind of just gave the plumber example. Maybe we enter a world where people can arm themselves with more context through in-person interactions. The problem identification doesn't go anywhere. Where does it start? Or like, where is the jumping off point for us today? Well, it's kind of like maybe some of you are asking, when I was first introduced, like, okay, why is this guy making shoes? I get this question a lot. Maybe it seems kind of random for someone who's like working in manufacturing and design tools to be so like fixated on footwear. But one of the reasons why footwear is so interesting is because it has so many cultural touch points. And the hope for footwear as a wedge is that it's something that everyone kind of intuitively understands. And so if you can get someone to understand that, hey, instead of needing to go out and participate in this massively linked industrial pipeline where my shoe is, intrinsically unsustainable, is passing through, 40 different factories and 5 different fulfillment centers before it reaches my home, and I can actually create that product in my own home and skip all of those kind of, all of that industrial bloat, we've won. So if you can begin to understand that, hey, maybe I have agency over creating a product like footwear, we can create a world where maybe you begin to understand you have agency over maintaining your home with your community of problem identifiers that you surround yourself with.
I wanted, or you go ahead.
Sorry, I just wanted to say, I think footwear is actually a great starting point because it's a cultural object that transcends its own utility.
Right.
But like, yeah, I think again, I'm in favor of like never needing a plumber again because, I mean, who wants to call a plumber? But in
that
defense,
example, I'm sorry.
In defense of the plumber, the plumber's an expert.
Yeah.
And like one thing that I think like especially younger people, because I work in academia and I work with a lot of young people, one distinction that they don't understand or one nuance that technology has sort of blurred is that information is not knowledge. There's a huge difference because experience fills the gap between information and knowledge. Like, yeah, you can WebMD anything you want, but that's not a substitute for a doctor. A doctor has knowledge, and even if you have information, you don't have knowledge. So I do think like one of the extremely sad things about our culture right now is this sort of degradation of expertise. And I think that will
Right.
actually become exacerbated
Right.
by more and more technology and more access to information. So yeah, go ahead. Sorry.
Yeah, I wanted to jump back to a comment you made earlier about how ideas are free and that anyone can look at your furniture or experience your furniture, but not necessarily buy your furniture. And I think that goes for just about anything. Is you can read about something and enjoy the concept and learn the concept and maybe preach the concept, but maybe not completely embody it. How do we create, like in the future now moving forward with heightened technology and everything in between, how do we create more opportunities for people to feel like they can have, take ideas and run with them? I feel like people, you walk into an art museum or a design gallery and people feel so ostracized by the space because it's not something that just tells them what to do. And I know you have a lot to say about kind of design and how it shouldn't be instructional. It shouldn't tell you what to do. Like, does design need to have such an intent? Does it need to tell us how to interact with it? And I think that's a problem we have, is that we go into spaces and we don't know how to interact in those spaces. And then we feel like outsiders to it. And I think that's one of the main kind of barriers for people who want to participate in design. But really, design is just, like you said, socializing. It's making choices to get together with people and talk about ideas and make things. But how do we make that, apparent to everybody? It's not. People think that it's only for a select amount of people to be able to do those things.
I'll go. Okay. Well, it's important to me that my work is accessible to people who have no understanding of art and design. That anyone can relate to can you make eye contact in a chair? What does a chair do? And have you ever thought about what it could do? And why does a chair only have to be for sitting? We've had chairs for thousands of years. Why can't we expand its potential and think about other things? And I think children understand that. Adults understand that who have no context for art making and design, and people are really intimidated by art, And I'm on the board of an art museum, I see lots of different types of people interacting with art, and the intimidation is really because art is really for a group of people who understand it, and I don't think that's wrong. I think all fields are like that. They're for the people who understand it, and I think people who know more about art and design get more out of my work because they understand the references, the sort of cultural and historical references that I'm making in the work. But regular people can understand it too, and I think there's the urgency of this time really requires a lot of ideas. And I think we need culture to be we need cultural makers to really be thinking about the time that we're living in and what is important to say now. And I think that's kind of the solution. And yeah, like I said, ideas are free. So if that's kind of how I think about my work, is I'm putting ideas out there for other people to have access to them. And this is the way that I can do it, because I didn't set out to be an artist, actually. I thought, I'll move to New York and figure out what a furniture designer is. If that's a real job, how you do it. Do you apply for a job at IKEA? I didn't know how any of that worked. And then I was just you know what? I'm just gonna make stuff myself, because that's the only way I can figure out how to do it. And craft is very accessible to people, and I'm very much in that craft world. I make everything by hand. All of my woven sculptures are handmade on a traditional loom. So, people can understand craft in a way that's very basic, because again, it is so essential to humanity that time went into this, knowledge went into this. I can appreciate it just on that level. So I think there's different levels of understanding that are possible if you create work with that intention. There's the ground level of just people with no experience can understand it this way, and then the people with more and more intellectual experience with the kinds of subject matter that you're working with can understand it differently.
Yeah, I agree that it's just, in my practice, it's about creating accessible entry points. I mean, it goes back to why footwear, How do you reduce the time to an aha moment? And that aha moment has cascading effects in that person's ability to relate to and engage with and understand art, the world around them, the built environment.
So I guess thinking about the theme of the conference of what's next. I was thinking about kind of what are some ways that today we can leave here, the Wheeler Opera House, and go out into our built environment, go out into Aspen. What are some things that we can think about today and in the future, tools or mementos to take with us to think about how we can better engage with design and how we can better communicate to others in our lives, personally, in business and culture? If there's anything that we can take away from your own practices, from what you're interested in, how we can better communicate with one another through design, through art, through just being friends. Is there anything that...
I think you just said it. I think it's just be in community. Be in community. Understand, like, what is, ask yourself the question of, like, what are the problems that I can kind of uniquely identify, and how do I communicate that to the people around me? Context is the designer's greatest tool, and everyone brings different contexts to the table. And, like, this is why the proverbial plumber is not going anywhere. If you have a chance to go out and be in nature and be in community, just pay attention to each other. Again, I feel like maybe there was a subcontext that I think AI is going to create this kind of like individualistic paradigm, among us, and I think AI is just a tool. And it's just a way for us to breathe access into some of these really like gate-kept industries. But the secret sauce is always context and community.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. And I also think it's important to evaluate your relationship with technology and think about, like, this is a tool, what do I need it for? And approach it that way. And I also think for designers, it's important to think about definitely identifying problems and what you can solve, and to not be intimidated by whether or not you can actually solve those problems. But just to put ideas forth is really important, because it just feels like America's really stuck right now in terms of like innovating in a way that's like genuinely going to solve problems and do something that actually makes an impact. And it's not like I'm deluded in thinking like, oh, I'm solving the American alienation problem. Of course I'm not. But at least I'm putting ideas out there that like people can think about. And if like more and more people are putting out ideas that at least like give people something to think like, yeah, maybe I should think more critically about this, then I think it's just, we create a culture of imagination, Like I'm really like into the 60s, like I'm like kind of obsessed with that era and always have been. And I think it's because of the sort of optimism that people have, like it just felt so palpable in that time where it felt like anything is possible. And I think like, I watch a lot of like futurology content, like there's all these like predictions about the future that people made in the 60s. And it's like, the kinds of things they were talking about back then are the things we're still talking about now. And I think like the reason that they felt so optimistic was because every field was innovating, not just one. Like it feels like technology is our focus right now in terms of innovation, and everything else has kind of fallen away in a way. And I think like every field should have people who are like really thinking about problems, and even if they can't solve them, just put ideas out there. Another piece of advice for designers is to think of established convention as just like a rough draft. And that's how I think about a chair. It's like, okay, we have like a gazillion chairs, but like what else could it be? And you can think about every single object that way, It's like, what else could this thing that we know about, that we feel like we've reached the apex of like what it can do, what else can it do? Like a lot of people tell me like, well, there's no real innovation because everything's already been done. And I find that so insane. Of course, that's not true. A lot of things have been done, but there's nuances and differences, and there's always room for innovation in every single thing, no matter how simple it is. A paper bag could be innovated, I
look forward to see how you innovate that. No, I think it's really, Aspen, it's where we are currently is Aspen has been built on ideas. So I encourage, you all today at the Aspen Design Conference and through the weekend to share ideas with each other, as little or ridiculous as they might be. just talking about them, as you're saying, it just opens up a realm of possibilities between each other. New friendships unfold, new doors open, new projects, new things, new ideas, new people. And that's just the beauty of discussing and thinking about ideas. And I think that's just the start of better communication between all of us, is how we discuss the things that we're actually interested in and the things that make us get passionate and excited to wake up in the morning and to go into the world with vigor and with tenacity and all these other incredible adjectives that I'm forgetting now. But this has been so lovely. Thank you all for being here. I wanted to say that after this, Adam and Luam will be around the corner at the Aspen Collective Gallery. You can come over, you can ask any questions that you might have. We'll be there for the next 30 minutes to an hour. Come hang out with us, come be with us, and I can't wait to see you all at the rest of the Aspen Design Conference. So thank you for being here.
Thank you.
Thank you.